Welcome to the latest episode of Lo-Fi Travel. Probably the very first thing tourists do in Hanoi is take a walk around HOAN KIEM Lake. So I thought I'd show you everything there is to see here and give you a little history and context. I've spent over a year in Hanoi alone and tried out several different neighborhoods, but my favorite place to stay is on the lake. This is my cheap guest house. It's a private room for $20 a night with cleaning once a week, a hot plate and kettle for cooking basics, air conditioning, a non-fussy water heater, adequate Wi-Fi, and most importantly for me, an elevator. My favorite thing about it is that the owner is extremely strict about smoking. If anyone complains about a whiff of smoke, the accused is kicked out immediately. Cigarette smoke is a serious problem in Hanoi, with most men smoking indoors and most hotels doing absolutely nothing about it. So I really appreciate this attitude. Of course, you can stay somewhere nicer and should if you want aesthetics, views, buffet breakfast, but this works for me and shows you what you can get with no lease pretty cheaply in a great neighborhood here. One aspect of Hanoi that's a bit odd or even scary for Westerners is this idea of homes, restaurants, businesses, etc., being down these small dark alleys. In New York, no one would ever walk down an alley like this, especially at night, for fear of getting robbed, raped, or pissed on by a drunk. In Hanoi, this problem is more or less resolved by neighbors in the ground floor rooms, leaving their doors open and lights on during the day. So everyone knows who's coming and going, and you know they're watching you too. At 10 or 11 p.m., they pull down a metal roll-down door and lock it. Everyone who lives in the alley has a key, but it's such a pain to fight with the door at night that it enforces a sort of curfew for most people. The reason things were built this way in the first place has to do with the way the Vietnamese have built their towns from time immemorial. Main roads connect villages, and each village is signified by a gate on the main road. Through the gate, down the street, are the houses and businesses of the village. In Thăng Long imperial times, which lasted roughly from the year 1000 to 1800, this street, now called Lê Thái Tổ, was actually a main road connecting 6 different villages. Khanh Tueta, Khanh Thuy Hu, Từ Thập, Phúc Phở, Thị Vật, and Tô Mộc, all belonging to Tiện Tước Canton in the old Thơ Sướng district. If you imagine the city growing more and more crowded, getting renovated by the French, bombed by the French, land reformed by the Viet Minh, then sold in ridiculously small and oddly shaped parcels after 1988, over time, villages sprawl into each other, courtyards are filled with more buildings, and village gates become alley entrances. My alley, 40B, used to be part of the French Chamber of Commerce and Agriculture building, as seen in this picture from 1930. Now it's the Hapro supermarket chain headquarters. Of course, there was always a neighborhood of houses behind the facades of the big French buildings built facing the main streets. Over the past few years, Hanoi has completed a double ring road around the lake. So the inner ring is a walking street on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, and the outer ring is reserved for cars and motorcycles. If you're up and out between 5 and 8 in the morning, the park around the lake is clogged with people of all ages walking and running, whatever the weather. I usually turn right and walk past the Hanoi Moi newspaper. Hanoi Moi means New Hanoi, and it's really a stalwart news source run by the Hanoi City Party Committee. The current building was designed and built by Auguste-Henri Vieux in 1900 for a French colonial newspaper called L'Avenir du Tonkin, but that paper had been in business at an old house at this address since 1886. After the August Revolution in 1945 and 1946, the building was commandeered by the Viet Minh and published the National Salvation newspaper. In 1957, following the full withdrawal of the French, this became the capital newspaper, and in 1968, Ho Chi Minh himself renamed it the New Hanoi. So this spot has been a newspaper office for almost 140 years. Year-round, night and day, no matter the weather, Instagrammers love to pose under the red Hanoi Moi sign. I have literally never walked by without someone posing there. As you can see, the houses here are mostly French colonial era with retail on the bottom. Only counting the most exclusive city center neighborhoods like this, Hanoi is the seventh most expensive city per square meter in Southeast Asia, between slightly more expensive Jakarta and slightly less expensive Phnom Penh. For reference, Ho Chi Minh City is second behind Singapore and just before Bangkok, but Hanoians in the Old Quarter are absolutely convinced their neighborhood is more expensive. Across the street is a little restaurant with a lake view that's really popular with office workers at lunchtime. It's called the Four Seasons or Conifer. I don't know why the name change. The food is super basic and overpriced, but obviously people aren't coming for the food, and they do serve wine and beer. On the corner is the municipal police station, which I cannot find the architect for, but I believe it's also the work of Villedieu or his underlings, because it appeared at around the same time as the newspaper building in the same style, and the old police station previously here was also knocked down to build it. I never pop into the coffee shops on this corner simply because I go to the same one almost every day as a matter of habit, around the corner on Khay. In imperial times, this was the street where classic mother of pearl encrusted lacquered furniture and accessories were made, hence the name Tray Street. There was also a flower market every day with women selling fresh cut flowers on trays near the lake. Over time, colonial style shop houses popped up, and even though they've since been chopped up and renovated a million times, it's still the same kind of business on this street: boutiques and cafes. The flower market was made permanent, rebuilt several times, and then eventually removed completely for no good reason. I always have egg coffee and lattes at spatisserie. They also have a great American breakfast with eggs and toast if you're ever in need. It looks like a tiny place, but they're connected to the Silk Path Hotel, so they have the same menu and someone brings your meals down on a tray. I also really like to eat at Poke Hanoi, which is down an alley and up 3 flights of stairs, but totally worth it. They have really fresh and delicious food and also serve really nice juices and cold beer. Things can get a little wild if you go on a weekend night because this is the alley where the neighbors store and rent those little electric cars for kids at the weekend night market and walking zone. It's really easy to get a cyclo pretty much anywhere around the lake, but especially here. Crossing the street in Hanoi is scary for a lot of people. The way to do it is just to walk confidently and slowly. The motorcycles know how to drive around you. On the corner is Mickey D's. For those of you who like to compare menus in different countries, they do have a couple sets here with rice and a pretty extensive coffee selection. That's Vietnam, baby. The next corner is pretty architecturally significant. First, there's the McDonald's building itself, which was a pharmacy and family apartments for almost 100 years. Across Hàng Bài is Trang Tien Plaza, the premier shopping mall in Hanoi. Cartier, Louis Vuitton, Valentino, Gucci, it's that level of shopping mall. The building is new, but there has always been a very grand department store on this corner. During imperial times, feng shui masters determined that this was an auspicious corner for wealth and long-term commercial endeavors. So when the Nguyen dynasty took over in 1800, they built a mint there. In 1902, Godard et Compagnie built a big department store here and then expanded and upgraded it with an attic and big dome around 1915, renaming it Reunited Department Store after opening another branch in Saigon. In 1959, the facade was modernized and it was made a state-owned department store that a lot of the old-timers here still remember. It was rebuilt again in 1999 and yet again in 2013, which is what we have now. Popping across Trang Tien, the next big building on the corner is a government building known as the Vietnam Directorate for Market Surveillance. That means they catch people smuggling drugs, food, etc. It's known for always having a giant propaganda-style billboard of Ho Chi Minh, which they change every once in a while. Indeed, giant vintage propaganda-style billboards of Ho Chi Minh are their own art form in Vietnam. I spotted this one a little further down. I guess he's encouraging us to work out. Through the 1970s, this was a super elegant dance hall and restaurant where weddings and high society functions were held. Its heyday seems to have been the 30s. Now it's divided into lots of offices. The other corner of the building has gold trading shops. Turning down,
Đinh Tiên Hoàng.
on the corner where the flower market used to be, they've installed this horrifying, ugly clock just this past year. In French colonial times, this street was called Rue Garnier. Garnier was the leader of the French Expeditionary Force who captured Hanoi for the French in November 1873, before dying just 1 month later defending it at the hands of the Chinese Black Flags. On the left, there's a little tower called
Tháp Hòa Phong.
It was originally built in 1740 by Lord
Trịnh Giang.
as the water gate to
Bảo An.
Pagoda, then rebuilt in 1847 by the
Nguyễn.
emperors. Bao An Pagoda was, until its gradual demolition, considered the most beautiful pagoda in Hanoi. The first phase of demolition was the back houses of the pagoda sometime around 1885. Around 1900, the Grand Temple gates were pulled down as well, and only the little tower was left. There are many Buddhist and Taoist symbols and mottos on this little tower, but the gist of it all, when taken as a whole, is from whatever direction you come, you will be judged equally. Fitting for a temple's Watergate. On the right, where the temple used to be, is an interesting Art Deco building. It was originally built as a new chamber of commerce in the 30s after the Hapro building next door to me was considered too small. Now it is the international branch of the Vietnam Post Office. Next door is the big post office building, which is much more typical of the buildings around the lake. Giant, ugly, corporate in that soulless style. Past it is another Villedieu building, finished in 1899, and now known as the Old Post Office. It's still a domestic post office and bank branch. Just as a department store has always been where
Trang Tien.
mall is now, a post office has always been on this spot, or at least since the French arrived. This picture shows what is currently
Lý Thái Tổ.
park next door with a rustic post office in the middle. Lý Thái Tho Park next door features what can only be called a socialist realist sculpture of the ancient king. Once upon a time, on holidays, the French military band would parade down the street, seat themselves in the kiosk, and play. As you can see, different kinds of performances are still done here, including musical. Though now just a casual seating area, the kiosk is still there, and the square is still surrounded by beautiful French colonial buildings. This one is the present-day Office for Foreign Affairs. This really interesting one with the dome is the Old Officers Club. And across the street is the side of probably the most beautiful French colonial building in Hanoi, the People's Guest House. This is a nice, peaceful place to spend a lunch hour, assuming there are no booming announcements happening up front. As you can see, this week there's a huge book fair going on. Continuing along the lake, you cannot escape that smiling face of Ho Chi Minh. This Soviet-inspired building is the Hanoi City People's Committee. Despite its minimalist, imposing exterior, the interior can only be described as maximalist, traditional Vietnamese. Another block or so down, there are more French colonial houses, but they're later date Art Deco villas, bought and renovated almost beyond recognition by corporations. Along the lake here are the best views of the
Ngoc Son.
Temple and Red Bridge. In my opinion, this is the most peaceful area to relax near the lake with the fewest people, and it has the cleanest public restroom also, which is free if you are in need. As you approach the triangle with
Hàng Dầu.
there's a line of coffee shops, then a beautiful colonial building on the right, with a great restaurant downstairs called the Lakeview Restaurant. There are also always street food vendors on the sidewalk. Most people don't realize that street food is truly a part of the culture in Hanoi, not a novelty for tourists or a convenience for office workers. It's actually been sold at this spot for over 120 years. On the triangle, there used to be a movie theater in the 1920s and 30s. There's no theater there anymore, just another terrible sculpture. But this is a place where a big stage is often constructed to blast music during the weekends. The back half of the triangle is split into a cafe and a local temple to Baku. The temple is dedicated to the mother goddess
Liệu Hải,
and her two princess maidens named
Quỳnh Hoa,
and
Quế Hoa,
the mother goddess
Liệu Hải,
is one of the four immortals worshipped by the Vietnamese people, separate from Buddhist and Taoist belief. The temple itself dates from the late 18th century, though it has been renovated many, many times. Originally, this was the
Tạo Vọng,
village temple. In the 19th century, it was merged into
Hà Thanh,
village, and now it's obviously in the dead center of Hanoi proper. It's famous for being made of precious materials like wood from the
Xưa,
jungle and rock from Nue Mountain in central Vietnam. Not that I can tell the difference. The temple bell here was cast in 1800. The front house of the temple is across the street. It's not in disrepair, but it's also not in use. This concept of having towers with altars on islands in the middle of the lake, water gates on the shore, leading to grand gates, and then temple front houses, courtyards, and back houses, all splaying out from the lake, can be seen in this old picture from the 1880s. And it's not a concept that was really understood or respected by the French. Their goal was to build really wide paved roads all around the lake to make it a place for public use, quite apart from religious worship. And in the process, they knocked down almost all of these pavilions. Almost directly across the street from the Baku Temple is the
Ngoc Son,
Temple. This might be the most popular tourist attraction in Hanoi. In the early 1800s, various worshippers started erecting statues to different heroes and geniuses here. By 1843, when it acquired its name, Mount of Jade, there were statues to the ancient Chinese Mandarin,
Quan Vũ,
the Vietnamese general,
Trần Hưng Đạo,
and the Taoist genius.
Văn Xương Đế Quân,
In 1865, the poet and geographer
Nguyễn Văn Siêu,
collected funds to upgrade this temple, and that's when the current buildings and gates date from. Worshippers originally rode out to the island to pray in wet season and laid a barely stable footbridge, just some loose planks really, during dry season. The lake is very shallow. During dry season, there are certain parts you could walk across anyway. Within the first temple gate to the left is the brush tower, inscribed with the phrase, "Right on the blue sky." The second gate has an interesting finial at the top, not the typical gourd or fiery sphere, but a stone writing desk in the form of half a peach inscribed with philosophical thoughts. The picturesque red bridge is called Tay Hook or Sunny Spot. This is definitely an extremely popular place to pose for photos. The gate at the end of the bridge is called the Moon Pavilion. In the temple, the same grandees are still worshipped, though a statue to Amitabha Buddha has also been added. In an anteroom, two examples of the species of giant tortoise called the golden tortoise, native to the lake, are preserved. The older example encased here is from 1968. The newer is the last turtle ever to have been spotted, well known to locals as great-grandfather turtle. He was last seen alive swimming in December 2015, and his body was recovered for preservation in January 2016. It's believed that this species, possibly the same or possibly a very similar subspecies to the already very rare Yangtze giant soft-shell turtle, is now extinct. In legend, King Thai Tho, the emperor who drove out the Ming Chinese in 1428, had a sword named Heaven's Will given to him by the golden turtle god Kim Kui. One day, not long after the war had ended, with the Chinese accepting Vietnam's independence, the king was out boating on the lake. Suddenly, a giant golden turtle god surfaced, asking him for thanks and to return Heaven's Will to him. The king didn't know what to do, so he surrendered his sword, Heaven's Will, which the golden turtle god balanced on his back and disappeared with into the depths of the lake. So the king renamed the lake, hitherto known as the Emerald Lake, the Lake of the Returned Sword. I think this concept of fate is so distinctively Vietnamese. The idea that, of course, Heaven's Will manifests destiny around us at all times, but when you really need control, you can take it in hand and give it back when you're done. Back on the street, there are tourist tat shops and cafes from the intersection with
Lò Xú,
until you hit the water puppet theater. There are two water puppet theaters on the lake. The show at this one is very good, though the theater itself is modern and architecturally insignificant. Down,
Phố Hồ Hoàn Kiếm.
which is only a block long, is a fantastic bookstore called Artbook. On the corner is a hapro mini market offering convenience foods, but also a small selection of fruit, vegetables, meat, fish, etc. if you want to cook for yourself to stay healthy or not spend a lot at restaurants. I'm so used to it, I don't even find the offerings particularly exotic anymore, but I remember even the cold drink section being so interesting when I first came to Asia. Fresh Hanoi beer, vitamin D energy boosters, tiny little cans of Japanese Coke, tamarind and passion fruit juices, melon and pomegranate flavored milks, 1,000 different kinds of teas, and tiny overly sweet yogurts. Curling around the north side of the lake, there's an excellent skincare shop called Beauty and Health Essentials. The products are clearly chosen by someone who knows exactly what they're doing. Don't waste your time checking Guardian, Sammy Shop, and Mint. This place is a one-stop shop. Next, there's a row of at least 8 ice cream shops, and the roundabout where
Phố Đinh Tiên Hoàng.
meets
Phố Lê Thái Tổ.
at the northwest corner of the lake is one of the busiest in Hanoi because that's where the HOAN KIEM Lake neighborhood meets the Old Quarter or 36 Streets. This is another spot where they're always constructing a huge stage for some performance or another. The one downside of staying in this neighborhood, I must say, is that there will be loud, bad dance music shaking your walls for at least half your waking hours. There's literally a pile of coffee shops on this roundabout. They all have great views of the lake, and if you're having trouble getting cash from an ATM with your Western bank card, there are 2 consistently reliable ones here, Vietcom Bank on the far north side of the roundabout
Cầu Gỗ.
and HSBC on the west side of the roundabout. Back on Thai Tho, there's an unmissable restaurant on the water called Tueta. This was constructed in 1936 as the Cercle Nautique Rowing Club, but hasn't put any boats on the water since around 1958 when the current owners took over. Indeed, I've never seen so much as a rowboat on the lake. I presume they're not allowed because if anyone rented dragon boats or the like, Hanoians would go absolutely gaga playing with them, especially families on the weekend. The only 2 boats I've ever seen even parked on the lake are at
Ngoc Son.
temple, presumably to maintain the trees and sail over to Turtle Tower once in a while to check on the place. Down
Bảo Khánh.
in the basement of the Solaria Hotel is an authentic American diner called S&L Diner. If you need a break from the local food and a hit of steak or chili fries or popcorn shrimp, it's the only place to go. Past
Bảo Khánh.
there's an enclave of big, beautiful colonial buildings that were among the first French administrative buildings built in Hanoi. Now they serve as corporate offices, including the local TV station. Past the giant Shinhan Bank is the
Lý Thái Tổ.
temple. Sometimes they leave the gates open until 9 p.m., sometimes they close them at 4. It depends on a Buddhist calendar that frankly escapes me. Local events I'm equally unaware of, and I'm sure the occasional whim of the security guard or temple caretaker, as is common in Vietnam. Sometimes, when the gate facing the lake is closed, it's still accessible via the
Báo Nhân Dân.
temple entrance on
Hàng Trống.
Street, which it backs onto. Long ago, there was a communal house here, but the current Thai Tho garden dates to the mid-19th century. The first floor of the temple building to perhaps the 1920s, and the second floor was added in 1954. The communal house was completely renovated in 2020, and there's absolutely nothing old or interesting in the entire place. Just beyond the Thai Tho garden is the
Lục Thủy.
Restaurant. This is kind of a high society place, but you must remember it's Hanoi, so that doesn't imply gourmet food. It's pretty average local fare and subpar European food, presented in a very decorative way at high prices. Locals go here for coffee in the garden early in the morning, after running around the lake, or for business meetings in a private room, perhaps on a date. In the same building is the second water puppet theater. The show here is less flashy than at the other theater, but it's always charming nonetheless. I like water puppetry. The building is gorgeous, with extremely unique gingerbread house type elements. It was built in 1922 for the
Khai Chi Thiên Đức.
Association, also known as the Association for the Intellectual and Moral Formation of Annamites, which, needless to say, was dissolved in 1945. The original building did not have a second floor. This was added later. Just below the intersection of
Lý Thái Tổ.
and
Phố Hàng Trống.
is where you'll get the best view of
tháp rùa,
the Turtle Tower, undoubtedly the most photographed building in Hanoi. In the last quarter of the 15th century, a fishing shack was built here for the king's convenience. In the 16th and 17th centuries, it was upgraded into a small temple, then left to decay in the 18th and 19th centuries. The current tower was actually built by the French in 1886, and in 1890 they added a small Statue of Liberty to the top, which the locals called the Swamp Lady. It was moved to a garden in 1896 and destroyed personally by the mayor of Hanoi during the August Revolution. The little corner where Hang Trong meets Li Thai Tho is a bit of a high society hangout. There's the 5-star Apricot Hotel, the very pricey Cophelia coffee shop, and the Four Seasons Hotel has been under construction, much delayed by COVID. If you're a Western lady who has to face the difficulty of buying shoes that fit in Vietnam, the Charles and Keith store here is a good first stop. They do carry sizes above 38, which the local shops generally do not. And that's it, I'm back home. I hope you enjoyed this little tour of HOAN KIEM Lake, past and present. If you did, please like, share, and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.